One man, two bodies, same moment in time. Not a metaphor, not a spiritual lesson about being present. A Catholic priest named Padre Pio was physically seen in two completely separate locations at the exact same time by multiple witnesses who had no connection to each other. While he stood in his monastery in Italy, he also appeared in a prison cell in Austria. While he prayed in his room, he also materialized at a stranger's deathbed 300 miles away. This happened hundreds of times over 50 years. And here's what makes it impossible to dismiss. The Vatican hated it. They sent spies. They intercepted his mail. They banned him from public ministry. They tried everything to prove he was a fraud. But every investigation only confirmed what they desperately wanted to deny. The man they were trying to silence was doing something the laws of physics say cannot happen. You've probably heard of Padre Pio, stigmata, the wounds of Christ bleeding from his hands for half a century, the only priest in history to bear them that long. That's the version most people know. But the bilocation is where it gets strange, because stigmata can be explained away as psychosomatic, wounds appearing from extreme meditation or religious ecstasy. Science has language for that. Being in two places at once, there is no naturalistic explanation for that. Either the witnesses are lying, hallucinating, or the fundamental rules of physical reality bent around this man. And the witnesses weren't random mystics. They were soldiers, doctors, families, Vatican investigators, people who had every reason to be skeptical. Here's the roadmap. First, we're going into the documented cases, not folklore, official testimonies. Then, we're going into the Vatican's surveillance operation against him, the lengths they went to expose him as a fraud, and then the question nobody wants to ask. What does it mean that a human being could surrender so completely to God that even matter and space obeyed? Let's start with the soldier. World War II. An Italian airman named Luigi Orioni is captured and thrown into a prison cell somewhere in Austria. No trial, no contact with family, just concrete walls and silence. He's alone, terrified, waiting to die. Then one night, a Capuchin friar walks through the wall. Not appears in a vision. Walks in. Brown robes, beard, calm face. The friar doesn't say much, just tells him he'll survive. Tells him to pray. Tells him his name, Padre Pio. Orione had never heard that name before. The friar stays for maybe 10 minutes, then walks back through the wall and disappears. Years later, after the war, Orione goes to Italy. He hears about this priest with the stigmata and decides to visit. Out of curiosity, he walks into the monastery, and there's the man from his cell. Same face, same voice, same presence. Orione confronts him. "You were in my prison cell." Pio doesn't deny it. He just smiles and says, "I get around." Now here's the documentation. Multiple witnesses confirmed Pio never left the monastery during the war. He was under constant surveillance by that point because the Vatican already suspected something. His movements were tracked. His schedule was recorded. There is no physical way he traveled to Austria. But Orione wasn't hallucinating. He described details about Pio he couldn't have known. The scent of roses that followed him, the specific texture of his voice, the way he held his wounded hands. Two realities. Same moment. Both confirmed. The deathbed cases are even stranger. A woman in Uruguay is dying. Her family gathers around. It's the early 1900s. No phones, no planes, no way to contact Italy in real time. But the woman is Catholic, and before she dies, she whispers that she wants to confess. Her daughter prays, "God, if only Padre Pio could be here." Minutes later, he's standing in the room. Same brown robes, same stigmata wounds. He hears the woman's confession, blesses her, stays until she dies peacefully. Then he's gone. The family writes to the monastery in Italy asking how Padre Pio traveled to Uruguay and who paid for it. The monastery writes back confused. Padre Pio never left. He was in the chapel that entire day. Multiple monks saw him. So who was in Uruguay? The family provides details. His height, his scars, the prayers he said, everything matched. The church investigates. They interview the family separately. Their stories align. No contradictions. No signs of fraud or mass hysteria. Just a man in two places doing the same thing he always did, serving souls. And this is where the pattern emerges. Pio never bilocated for himself. He didn't appear at parties or travel for leisure. He only appeared where someone desperately needed a priest, a confession, a blessing, last rites. It was always about obedience, never spectacle. God needed him somewhere, so he was there, while also being where his body already was. Now we go into the surveillance. By the 1920s, the Vatican was getting reports from all over the world about Padre Pio. Miracles, healings, and yes, bilocation. This made them deeply uncomfortable. The church doesn't like chaos. It doesn't like unexplainable priests attracting massive crowds without official approval. So, they did what institutions do. They tried to control it. First, they sent investigators, priests whose job was to observe Pio and find the trick. They watched him for months, followed him, took notes, interviewed witnesses. Their conclusion? No fraud detected. Everything reported appeared to be genuine. That made it worse. So, the Vatican escalated. They installed a spy in the monastery, a priest whose entire job was to watch Pio every single day and report back. They intercepted his letters, monitored his confessions, restricted his ministry. At one point, they banned him from saying public mass. They isolated him, tried to make the phenomenon stop by limiting his contact with the world. It didn't work. The bilocation cases kept coming. In fact, they increased. People reported seeing him in locations the spy confirmed he never physically traveled to. The tighter the surveillance, the more undeniable the evidence became. The Vatican was stuck. They couldn't prove he was faking, but they also couldn't explain what was happening. So, they did what powerful institutions do when confronted with something that threatens their control. They tried to silence him. For decades. But God doesn't need permission from committees. So here's the question you're probably building toward. How? How does a human body exist in two places? What mechanism allows that? Is it quantum? Is it spiritual? Is it a glitch in the matrix? But that's the wrong question. The better question is, WHO was Padre Pio that this became possible. Because bilocation didn't happen to him, it happened through him, and the difference matters. He wasn't special because of DNA or genetics or secret techniques. He was special because of surrender, total surrender. The kind of surrender most people can't even imagine. Every account of his life describes the same thing. He prayed constantly. He obeyed without question. When God asked him to suffer, he suffered. When God asked him to serve, he served. He had no agenda, no ego, no plan B. He became so transparent to God's will that his physical body became secondary to his spiritual assignment. Think about that. What if the limits we experience aren't limits of reality, they're limits of obedience? Here's what the church didn't want to admit. Padre Pio was proof. Proof that the supernatural isn't folklore. Proof that total surrender produces results the natural world cannot explain. Proof that God still moves in ways that defy human categories. And that's terrifying for institutions, because you can't control proof, you can't manage it, you can't fit it into 5-year plans or theological frameworks. Pio wasn't asking for permission, he wasn't submitting proposals for bilocation, he was just obeying, and when you obey God at that level, the rules change. The Vatican wanted a domesticated saint, someone they could point to in books and control in life. What they got was a man so yielded to God that even physics had to adjust. Here's the humanity part. Pio didn't enjoy this. Read his letters. He begged God to take the stigmata away. He called the wounds a humiliation. He wanted to be a normal priest. Say Mass. Hear confessions. Serve quietly. But God had other plans. And Pio's response wasn't, "Let me negotiate." It was, "Let me obey." That is the gap between most of us and the supernatural. We want to negotiate. We want to keep one foot in control. We want God to work within our comfort zone. Pio gave up comfort, gave up control, gave up the illusion that his life was his own. And when you give up that much, when you become that surrendered, reality itself makes room. So what does this mean for you? 3 things, each tied directly to what we just saw. First, stop negotiating with God. Pio didn't bilocate because he prayed harder or fasted longer. He bilocated because when God asked him to serve someone 300 miles away, he didn't say, "But I'm already busy here." He just said yes, full yes, no conditions. Your breakthrough isn't waiting on more knowledge, it's waiting on more surrender. Second, Expect opposition when you obey. The Vatican didn't celebrate Pio. They silenced him, put him under surveillance, tried to prove he was faking. When you start living in radical obedience, don't be surprised when religious people are the first ones to doubt you. Institutions hate what they can't control. God doesn't need their permission to move through you. Third, let go of how. Pio never understood how bilocation worked. He didn't need to. He wasn't a physicist. He was a servant. You don't need to understand the mechanics of the supernatural. You just need to obey the assignment. God handles the logistics. The Vatican eventually canonized Padre Pio, made him a saint, put his face on prayer cards, turned him into the very thing they tried to suppress. But here's what they couldn't canonize: the danger he represents. Because if one man can surrender so completely that the laws of physics bend around his obedience, what does that say about the rest of us? What would your life look like if you stopped negotiating? If you gave God full access? Not 80%. Not, I'll obey after I figure it out. Full surrender. Would you bilocate? Maybe. Maybe not. But something would shift. Something in the spiritual atmosphere would break open. Because when a human being becomes that available to God, the impossible stops being theoretical. Padre Pio didn't try to be in two places at once. He just tried to be where God needed him. And that was enough.